So we will get to talking about the military. But first things first, happy Thursday. Second thing is what we are going to be doing is we're going to be going through this dev diary in order. The beginning part, they are doing a retrospective on particularly the rollout of 1.8 and Pivot of Empire. Then they do talk about what's next, which is military stuff, which we will be talking about. And finally, after this, which I think is the meat and potatoes of what people are going to be interested in, we will do a rundown of the Hotfix that had just dropped. We will be reading through this as well. I anticipate that this is generally less interest people than kind of this Dev Diary update, and so we will put this at the end here. And without further ado, let's dive in. Happy Thursday, everyone. It is indeed a happy Thursday with news of a fixed military. It's time for another Victoria 3 development diary. Today I'll be talking about my thoughts on the release of 1.8 and Pivot of Empire, the feedback we received, and also a bit of what's next in store for Victoria 3. This is Wissington, who, as far as I know, is the guy in charge. He's the big cheese, the big kahuna, the big nice of the big devs, and as some of you remember, 1.8 was actually meant to be 2 updates. I remember, Petridge Farm also remembers. A smaller 1.8 with bug fixes and polish. It has been interesting that up to this point, the even number kind of patches have been bridge patches, is kind of just how I think about it, which bug fixes and polish. 1.2 was like this, 1.4 was like this, 1.6 was like this. And now we have a little bit of a rotation, and a larger 1.9 Pivot of Empire with the larger free features such as the political movement rework and discrimination rework. Now, I anticipate 1.9 will be a bridge patch based on what they kind of say later in this dev diary. We ended up combining these into a single update because the release windows between the two were just too tight, and as a result, 1.8 became a chunk of an update with a lot of potential bugs and balance issues. On the whole, feedback around the update, and in particular the discrimination rework, has been positive, and you seem to be enjoying the additional dimensions that the update adds to the economic and political side of Victoria 3. However, there are a few issues, a few bits of feedback on the not-so-positive side that I want to specifically address. Now, this and kind of a later paragraph where Wiz also kind of gives a similar type of lead into talking about things specifically. We've received a ton of positive feedback, but this has not been my impression of the feedback I have seen in regards to 1.8 and Pivot of Empire both, which is that, on the balance, most of the feedback I've seen has been negative. And I think, especially from other content creators, although I think some of them have come around, I personally think that this might be the most important patch so far for improving Victoria 3, which is the heart of Victoria 3 has always really been pops. And the only thing that pops really care about in terms of informing politics is their material conditions previously. And with the introduction of both the discrimination system and also political movements, now pops care about their cultural position. And so there's an entire another axis that pops care about, but also it's opened up a broader potential for pops to care about other things as well. And it's the heart of the game, but it's also like a subtle part of the game. It's not like bells and whistles. It's not like, the introduction of power blocks with 1.7. And comparing a flavor pack patch to a DLC patch is, I think, in some regards inappropriate. But 1.8 might even be better than 1.7. In terms of like some of the more subtle things, also a ton of what they've done in 1.7 that I've really liked is they've removed a lot of the fringe, weird, exploitative play patterns, which I suppose is only like relevant to players that have kind of in the upper range of hours and are aware of some of the exploitative stuff that's just strange and weird, like the bankroll metagame got killed, the high tax metagame got killed, but then they kind of brought it back, just various other things that we'll not do some sort of comprehensive thing on, but I have been very pleased with the patch as a whole. And I think that the patch also, kind of on the back end of things, has introduced more modding kind of potential as a result of the new systems than like Power Blocks did, than 1.7 did. I think that it's huge for modding, and we just haven't had an opportunity to see some of the tools get used. Persistent political movements, I think, is just absolutely adds so much depth to the game, but it does it in a subtle way that is not bells and whistly. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why the feedback hasn't been all that great, because if you haven't played Victoria 3 in a while and you come back after a patch, I think that you might not feel what it is that's going on. So my personal impression has been, I think that the patch has been great. And I'm saying the patch, including both Pivot of Empire and the free portion of the patch. I don't think it's appropriate to like separate them, and to think of them in terms of being different categories. But I also think that this analysis, it's just the people around me that have been negative, or I'm not missing something, I think analysis is just kind of generally wrong, which is that generally the feedback has been negative from my impression. I guess I haven't checked the Steam, what people think on the Steam, in terms of that sort of feedback, but that's just been how I've seen things. On release, we had a very nasty issue introduced by backend change to the launcher, which caused users with a non-Unicode character to crash when launching the game, which unfortunately slipped past the testing due to the fact that all of our work emails use only Unicode characters. This one actually had us pulling out our hairs a bit, trying to find the cause, but with help from the engine team, we were finally able to narrow it down and get it fixed out just before the weekend. We don't usually make a habit of patching 1745 on Fridays. No, they did not. But in this particular case, it was warranted. This did not affect me, so I can't really comment on it. We've gotten a fair amount of feedback from the rework of companies. I gave them a ton of feedback. This was something I was kind of agitating about before the release of the game on early access. In 1.7, I really didn't leave a lot of feedback, but for this one, I kind of left a lot of feedback on companies because I think 1.7 companies was better than release companies of 1.8, but I think that with some of the changes they've introduced and are introducing, that 1.8 is probably going to be better. We've gotten some feedback about the rework of companies to own and affect specific buildings has been made them somewhat underwhelming compared to the way they worked in 1.7. Underwhelming on release, yes, and we agree that this is an issue. We have made some changes in Hotfix Ascents, they have, and are continuing to read your feedback and make adjustments as needed. You can always add Pelly, throwing Pelly under the bus. Normally you can't add devs on the Discord, but now you can at Pelly. Hey, Pelly. You can always at Pelly directly on our social platforms for key feedback in this regard, especially on Discord, the forums, and the Reddit. Rip your inbox. Migration ended up being far too restrictive, and assimilation ended up being too restrictive as a result of the changes made to discrimination. This is, I think, on the 1.8.3 hotfix. It was not too restrictive before then. My sample size on this isn't large enough, I think, to really comment. Both issues should now be fixed. Both fixes have now been resolved in hotfixes. Sounds great. I do like the change to assimilation where they made it so that it had to be, you could only assimilate to heritage, assimilate along lines where you share a heritage trait. I thought that this was good. I'm not sure if they mean that they've taken that out, but it didn't make, some of the assimilation didn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Like, you can assimilate culturally, but you can't assimilate, like, ethnically. So, like, if your discrimination is the result of ethnicity, then, like, you can't, there's obvious, like, someone who's Chinese can't become African, in terms of, like, the race and how they present, like, visually. And so, I think that what you could do, though, is make it so that everyone has a cultural trait, and you can specifically assimilate to their cultural trait, or something like that. Which I don't know exactly how this would operate, but like, if Han, like, Pop comes to America, like, the notion that they could assimilate to become not just Han, but Han American, I think that this would be an interesting change, but this isn't something that's currently present. And here's the second part. I also want to take a moment to talk about the release and reception of Pivot of Empire. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback about the flavor it adds to India and how much an interesting game the region has become, which of course we're very happy to hear. With that said, there's some things that didn't work out quite as we wanted, which has resulted in some learnings for Victoria 3 team going forward. Overwhelmingly, So I have been of this impression just in general regarding game development and ongoing support of the game, which is that when they are making a concerted effort to put most of the value of the patches and the things that an entire development team has been working on for several months into the free patch. What this means is that the stuff like the flavor packs are going to feel, relatively speaking, light. And I think that what this is a good faith effort by Paradox to make it so that the game is more accessible to people and users down the road, because if all the essential features are on the free patch, you don't need to buy all the DLC in order to enter and start playing the game. The barrier to entry for playing the game is low. For example, EU4, there's a bunch of features that you need that are locked behind DLC, and it costs several $100s to enter the game. They're trying to do this for the long-term health of the game to be better, but also it makes development easier. Development is easier because you don't have these essential mechanics that need to work on every single combination of DLC one could possibly have. And so it makes them more efficient, and the improvement to the efficiency of the development team is improved the more DLCs they have. So if you have Pivot of Empire but you don't have Sphere of Influence, your game still has to run. And same with vice versa. If you have Pivot of Empire but you don't have, if you have Sphere of Influence but you don't have Pivot of Empire, your game still has to work somehow. And so they have to bug fix for literally every iteration. And so what they are doing is they are putting the meat and the potatoes of the mechanics inside the free patch. What this means is that every single, especially with the flavor packs, every single one of these is probably going to feel light to people. My impression, based on the feedback I have seen of people, is that it's almost entirely negative regarding Pivot of Empire, because it adds a whole bunch of flavor to India, it adds a bunch of cosmetics, but it's not adding any sort of immersive mechanics. I think that is a good thing, because of the reasons I've just discussed, and my impression is, if you like this game and you play it a lot, you should consider buying Pivot of Empire, regardless of if you think it's worth it. If you like the 1.8 patch, and also, if you're not sure, you can play on the 1.8 patch for a while, decide what you think, and then buy Pivot of Empire or not. But a lot of the people who are being super negative and saying the Pivot doesn't have anything in it, that's kind of the idea. They're not trying to DLC lock people out of essential mechanics, like what was done with EU4. And so I like the way that they are approached to having it, but most of the stuff I've seen regarding it is negative as a result, because some people just say it's feature light, which it is feature light. It's only flavor. And so this has been my general impression. And I think that this, where we're saying it's mostly positive and then there's some negative stuff, just maybe I'm just off, but this has not been what I have seen in regards to the feedback. But let's just continue on. Most significantly, it's clear that we need to spend some time testing and iterating on the balance of complex journal entries, like the Unstable Raj, before releasing them into the wild, to ensure the difficulty level and overall impact on game outcomes are where we want them to be. The reward for some of these journal entries has just kind of felt underwhelming relative to the difficulty. And you know what's if they gave they give early access to a lot of content creators. If they gave this a little bit earlier, it's possible that, but that would shorten their development time. It's possible that we could catch some of these issues, but honestly, the content creators that are giving, they're not all giving feedback anyways, so maybe that's not even a good way to approach it. But yeah, they can tweak this stuff after the fact, but you definitely want it clean on release, because that's when you get the huge spike of players. And if they don't like the release thing, it's going to be rough. Specifically, playing the EIC was really, really hard when you had to contribute 40% of your income. And they've since nerfed that. I was actually a huge fan of that. I thought that was really fun and interesting. It's now twice In both 1.8 and 1.7, there's been one particular run that is just way harder, that they've almost that I was just such a fan of it being a lot more difficult that they've almost immediately patched. In 1.7, it was manor houses took up infrastructure, so countries with enormous levels of subsistence farms, which each create a manor house, would just have ungodly bad infrastructure problems at the start of the game. I thought that this was interesting. It made China really, really ridiculously hard, and then they nerfed it, and I was kind of a fan of it. And then similarly, EIC having to contribute 40% of his income, I thought was really interesting. But I guess if you're trying to sell a DLC patch on it, maybe you don't want it to be that interesting. We need to rethink how we set rewards for journal entries so that they feel appropriate to the challenge of completing them. The utilitarian journal entry is really hard to complete. It also gives you basically nothing relative to just not failing it. If you don't complete it, but don't fail it, and then it times out, you basically get the same reward as you do for completing it. We also need to get better about telling the player what rewards they are going to be, so they don't have to make a guess and check. They don't have to make a guess or check the wiki when deciding whether or not to try and complete a journal entry. Absolutely, this opacity, I think, just doesn't add anything to the game, and I would love for journal entries to be more transparent as to what you can receive from them. We need to ensure that the AI can handle the content we add, particularly for complex, difficult journal entries. This is something I agree, but I don't know too much about programming AI or this type of stuff, so it's hard for me to comment on these types of things. Finally, and we're about to get in the military, I want to touch briefly on what's coming next. I won't spend too long on this, as next week's Dev Diary is going to be the customary What's After 1.8, which will all be about this topic, but I feel that I would be ignoring the elephant in the room if I didn't address the fact that the significant amount of feedback we've gotten about 1.8 isn't so much about what is in 1.8, but rather what wasn't, namely, a number of you would put it fixing the military system. This is the huge thing. This is, in fact, the elephant in the room, and this has been the elephant in the room for some time. This has not been kind of my opinion as much, with the exception of the diplomatic play. I think the diplomatic play is really bad, but I don't care about military as much as the average player. But overwhelmingly, the feedback I see about the game is fix the military. After fix the military, kind of the most substantive and common thing I see is fix the military. And then after, of course, fix the military, the thing that I see most often, and I see it really, really a lot, on not on the forums, but on Reddit and on the Discord, is fix the military. Overwhelmingly, this is what people ask for, and I think that they have been asking for it basically since release. They stopped asking for it after 1.5 because 1.5 fixed the military, but it kind of fixed the military, and they're still asking for it. Just and in my mind, the development team was kind of not responding to this feedback in a way that was very dynamic or quick, and instead we just get economic update, political update, economic update, political update, economic update, political update type of pattern, which I haven't really had a problem with, because even though the military is frustrating at times, I'm not playing this game for the military, and if I wanted to play a game for the military, I'd play Hoey. And so this is a bit of a thing, but it looks like they're finally doing it. They're going to fix the military. Fixing the military system. There is, of course, a broad range of opinions on what exactly this entails. That is correct. But from my perspective, these are the most significant issues we see with the Victoria 3 military system as it stands. Front spaghetti, causing wars to become unmanageable and frustrating. This is correct. This is one of the sources of needing to micro wars really hard, which I would just as soon rather have there be a zero war micro. Another is naval landings being incredibly strong, and the AI can't defend against them properly. This one's a little bit rough because I'm not sure how you try and balance this exactly, but It's not as bad as, like, you just straight up lose some conflicts because the front split's funny, and it's really, really frustrating when it happens. And also sometimes you can abuse the AI by the front splitting funny, and that doesn't feel rewarding because it's not an immersive kind of element. Units suddenly teleporting away when their front disappears. This is really frustrating when they go all the way back. Now, technically, you can teleport your units back to the front if you want, because what you can do is you can delete armies, and when you delete armies, units teleport. So, if you have 2 armies, and 2 are on the front, and one is and none are at the home base, and then one teleports back to the home base, you can just disband that army, and all the units will teleport back to the second army. And so you can delete armies and recreate armies and teleport troops all over the place, which you probably shouldn't be able to do, but microing this in a way to restore your army to a front is incredibly obnoxious. Not a huge fan. Supply isn't impactful enough. It's basically irrelevant. And armies win battles they should really lose when facing critical equipment shortages. It basically only affects morale, or the equilibrium towards morale, where morale trends, which is just not a big enough deal. Lack of proper military access system, i.e. Prussia having to naval invade to reach Denmark. This is, I think, a problem. This has become less and less a problem I care about, but maybe I'm just so used to playing around this at this point. And it makes it functionally also so that you as the player, if they don't have a land border with you or a way to access you by land, you can just absolutely crush the AI in a lot of situations. And so, for example, if you're like France playing Russia, or maybe let's think of a small. If you're Sardinia Piedmont, and you're playing against, and you have a war against Austria, with whom you don't have a land border, often, even though there's just a little snippet of land between you and Austria, you can just beat them very easily because they have to naval land you. But that doesn't make sense because they would just march through North Italy. And so this would make it so AI that does not have large navies, or AI in general, would not be so easy to abuse. Troop allocation to offensive versus defensive battles are causing unexpected outcomes. For example, a general using all local troops to defend against naval invasion, causing another naval invasion to just walk in unprotected. Also very frustrating. The way you have to try and set it up so this won't happen is disable troop borrowing and have multiple armies defending the coast and this type of stuff, and it just it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel immersive. You can of course abuse the AI in this matter or in the same way because they will assign based on the potential combat width, and you can get in very quickly as long as you lock them up in a battle that will take long enough with one navy and one naval invasion, and you lock up the entire army, then the second one just kind of gets in for free, and none of this feels good. And so what we see here is this is the fact that this is all they talk about when talking about what's coming next is fixing the military. Makes me think 2 things. I think this is a bridge patch. It's not going to be a major patch. And I think the only thing they're going to really try and address is a combination of bug fixing and fixing the military system. For the next update 1.9, our ambition is to crack out all these issues in particular and trying to find a proper solution for front splitting and troop teleportation woes once and for all. They have been, to their credit, I was kind of a little bit snarky at the intro to the system. To their credit, they have tried to fix the front spaghetti multiple times and have said, hey, it should be a little bit better with the front spaghetti aspect specifically, but it just has never truly fixed it. It's particularly bad in northern China and Canada, where fronts, troops don't advance with the fronts, and so when the fronts get pushed, sometimes you have these runaway fronts that just push a million times before you can catch them, and then there's times where the troops have to travel around an entire continent because it got pushed funny, and Shout out to the loud car outside. Finding good solutions for these issues is going to be a fairly major undertaking, so you may have to wait a while for 1.9, but I promise we'll try and make it worth the wait. So this is not going to be a DLC patch that's coming up next. It's going to be a military fix patch, is my impression. With that said, we're done for today, except we're not, because we're going to read through the hotfix. Join us again next week as I continue to talk about what's next in updates 1.9, 1.10, and beyond. See you then. I think that 1.10, I'm hoping that 1.10 they address Navy and trade, but we'll see what's in 1.10. But considering this is all they've talked about in 1.9, and they've gone out of their way to talk about this, we might see this being as like the fixing the military patch, which would be fantastic if they accomplish it. You know, both 1.7 and 1.8 seem to... 1.7 definitely improved performance. 1.8 seems to have improved performance. And after a lot of patches of performance just steadily getting worse, even when they said it was going to be improved, that was incredibly refreshing. It would be very refreshing if 1.9 rather, kind of fixes the military. The thing that frustrates me most is not this stuff as much as it is the Diplo play, but people... Overwhelmingly, people who have been leaving feedback on the game, they've been asking for this stuff to get fixed. And so I'm glad that they are kind of taking another crack at it here. With all that said, let's read through the hotfix here, which is going to be Salutations, Victoria. I noticed this is not a Happy Thursday, which, you know, considering Pelly's the one who's posting this, and Pelly got thrown under the bus, you can apparently now at Pelly to ask her what's going on with what's going on with the lack of Happy Thursday here. Where's the section where Pelly got thrown under the bus? You can at Pelly. It's in here somewhere. You can leave feedback specifically to Pelly. Where is it? It's not in fixing the military system. I think it was in where they talk about companies. Anyways. Let's continue on with the hotfix. Hotfix 1.8.4 is now live, featuring improvements for companies, fixes for Russia and Britain being too protective of Mexico, and the removal of assimilation restrictions in homelands and more. To be fair, you could actually get around this by being kind of cute in terms of where you declare your primary war goal, but the fact that you have to be cute in that way is probably not good. Removal of assimilation restriction in homelands and much more. Oh, so this is where they approached it. You can now assimilate in homelands, but specifically, you still won't be assimilating except along heritage lines, I guess. Check out the full patch notes below. Checksum 1AE checksum is 1A3E. Last know I'm using checksum this time. We hate to see it. How they've fallen. As always, please report any bugs on bug reporting forums. This is a don't report it here type of thing. We also have updated known issues for 1.8 with fixed issues and known issues. The following changes have been made to the game compared to 1.8.3. We made the exception from service, subject to interaction accessible to all. Cool. Improvements. Changed companies so that if they own at least one level of a building in a company, any new level that is built in it by local private investors will be company owned. This is a huge change because it allows companies to get more market share, and it makes it so their throughput will not be diluted over time. This is a really big change. This is going to make it so that companies are good again. Now, to be fair, let's see if I can explain the issue in a short way. The problem is, the company bonus gives, like, let's say 50% throughput. The problem is, if they built one level, it would have 150% throughput. Then it would look really, really profitable. Then a different non-company private investors, so just a financial district, would build on top of that. what would end up happening is the two buildings get meshed together and the throughput gets averaged for the company building. So what would end up happening is the company building would effectively have their throughput reduced from 150% to 125%, and now the new financial district would be getting a free 25% throughput on their building, which means they aren't actually getting outcompeted by the company because the buildings aren't segregated. Segregating the buildings, separating them so you have the company buildings, like the company steel mills and the non-company steel mills, is not an option for performance reasons. So they have to be combined. And this would just feel really bad because what you would end up seeing in a lot of cases, when you'd see a level 1 company building, and then on top of it, there would be another building that is a non-company building, and you would see this in a ton of different states because what it seemed to be the case, I don't know exactly how the AI is choosing to build buildings. The company would see no buildings, they would recognize they could get 50% throughput, and they would build a building in a state that had nothing in it. And then the financial district would just build on top of that building and snake the throughput from the company. Now the company, recognizing that it won't have 150% throughput, won't build on top of that anymore, and so they'll build in a new place, and then the financial district, haunting that it is, would just follow the company around and build on top of it. Now, this prevents that interaction entirely and makes companies a lot better. Also, if companies acquire one level in every single province or every single state, then suddenly it's going to lock the financial districts out of that industry in its entirety. So we will see, I think, companies really start to begin to acquire a very large market share, especially if they've been around a little while, which means that their buff bonuses are going to be particularly large. Made companies much more likely to be the ones privatizing the building that fits their type. I'd rather they be more aggressive about tuning up the construction, but this seems fine. But it also seems that now the amount of money that companies are getting is not proportionate. It is way greater than the proportion that they contribute to the investment pool, and this is going to make them contribute a lot more to the investment pool proportionally, because the financial districts will no longer be stealing the efficiency that's created by their throughput bonus, or as much of it. The East India Company now gains annex war goals against rebellious states, princely states in the Indian Uprising. Maybe this means you want to intentionally cause it. Doctrine of the Lapse now transfers contents of the target's treasury to the East India Company. Hopefully this can't transfer debt, but if it can, oops. That's going to feel a little bit rough, but maybe we want it to be difficult. Collectivization now only ever targets privately owned levels, and is the number of levels to collectivize calculated as a fraction of the privately owned levels, so nationally owned levels are not subject to it, meaning countries with cooperative ownership / collectivized agriculture can now also have a public sector and make proper use of public sector foreign investment. This is a pretty big deal. I still think that cooperative ownership is still kneecapped by the change they made in a hotfix following 1.7. In regards to foreign investment, you will have a lot of your capitalists build overseas, specifically in your subjects, and when you turn cooperative onto co-ops, all those will become buildings that are owned by the local workforce. Now what they're saying is if you actively build buildings, those won't become built, but won't become owned by the local workforce. But as I understand it, anything that's privately owned that's overseas will still get owned by the local workforce. And so you effectively lose all your foreign invested buildings. That and laissez-faire just kind of being better in the abstract makes it so that I think co-ops just really aren't in a good place right now. But I think it's maybe fine that they're not in a good place. I would rather see the capitalist class continue to exist for foreign-owned buildings and just not local. But this is, as far as assimilation goes, this is probably a divergent sort of thing where you are deciding to pay more attention to not a realism pattern and more a simulation pattern. Or sorry, you're not paying attention to a simulation pattern as much as just a gameplay consideration. I think that would make the gameplay better. Emergency relief decree will no longer auto-cancel as long as at least 20% of the population experiences some sort of starvation. This seems good. An independent Ceylon is now automatically becomes Sri Lanka. Fair enough. Improve the clarity of unstable Raj tooltips. Spectacular. We see AI. Russia, Britain now start neutral towards Mexico so they don't block the U.S. westward expansion by default. Okay. You know what? Actually, I think... oh, we're too big. Our stupid head. Was that... Hopefully that wasn't... Yeah, that wasn't for the dev diary. But it is for this. So we gotta shrink it. Something like this. Nope. Yeah, I think actually on this patch, we've seen Mexico not get expanded into probably more than any other patch. So the AI versus the AI really struggling with this is actually a bit of a thing. As a player, you still should be able to take Mexico without too much difficulty if you know kind of how to utilize a different... Which, to be fair, this is not something that's intuitive to a new player, and it's also kind of a silly mechanic, but if you start the wars in certain strategic regions, this will not give opportunities towards Britain and Russia to join unless they have a defensive pact of some sort. AI now makes more of an effort to reach its desired levels of construction and innovation generation. Depending on how this is, this might be really fantastic. The AI is kind of notorious for not building enough construction. AI will now never accept being cut down to size as part of a peace deal and have to be capitulated to enforce a specific war goal. That seems fair enough. Balance. Removed restrictions that you could assimilate if you lived in a homeland. Removed restrictions that you can only assimilate cultures with which you share... Okay. 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 I'm not sure I like this change, but if you can assimilate everyone, regardless of heritage trait, that actually dramatically changes things. So, yeah, I don't know. I would have to think about that one quite a bit. That definitely makes it so I don't think you... I still think you need a pop that is in the same province or same state as the pops you're trying to assimilate that they could assimilate into. And so seeding the population there is still a bit of a problem, but this makes anything that is high discrimination, where you are still wanting to have accepted pops, much better. Currently, there's kind of like this weird sort of metagame where, you know, being able to employ up in buildings like the Forbidden City, make it so that cultural exclusion is good, which it might not necessarily be good or better than like national supremacy if this were not the case, which is very strange. I forget if the canals require it as well, but with the company changes, canals are probably not anywhere near as good. If the companies are better than they are in 1.7, the canal companies are going to have a smaller window where they're good, and if you can grow your GDP before that window hits, then the canal companies aren't going to be good. But like on release canal companies were 100% best in slot on the release of 1.8 here, but that was one of the considerations, is being able to employ up in these types of things, being able to employ up in government buildings, and if you can assimilate. And you don't need to seed a culture there. That is, you don't need to, if you're English, you don't need to get a population to go to Beijing in order to assimilate to being English. If this is the case, then this is going to make high discrimination a lot better. A political movement with 100% militancy can now always replace another movement with less than 100% militancy for the purposes of getting to start a civil war, even if they don't meet the usual 10% higher requirements. Fair enough. So if you're at 95 with one, you can't. To be fair, this might be so that you can't swap back and forth endlessly to avoid a rev. But that's kind of a weird gaming mechanic. Anyways, remove the restriction for conversion on the violent hostility acceptance status. Interesting. Can now assimilate violent hostility. So now the question is we have to check. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be, but if you don't need to have another pop there of your own to assimilate them into, like if you don't need an English pop alongside a Han pop to assimilate Han into English, then this is going to make discrimination significantly better. Allowed several revolution events to fire for secessions as well. The efficiency bonus to private investment now applies all the way up to 50 million GDP, up from 10 million, to make the private sector more able to keep up with intense early game government investment. That is fascinating. So, for those of you who don't know, there's a huge bonus that applies if you're under 10 million. I think at 0 GDP, it's like 3x or like 300%, and then linearly it goes to 100% at 10 million or something like this. If they extended that to 50 million, now openers are going to be way more explosive. That is interesting. That is so fascinating. That is a huge buff. We've seen very nearly every patch has slowed down the economy. I actually can't think of a patch that has sped up the economy, although it's difficult to say. 1.7 maybe, because power blocks give mechanics that allow you to increase GDP. But it's really a bit tough to say. I think overall, the general trend is that economies are slower, and every single patch, the difficulty or the amount of time it takes to reach 1 billion GDP is just higher. This is a really big deal, because if you are receiving if you're receiving 200% investment pool contribution when your GDP is 25 million, as a result of this, if it's like starting at 300% and linearly decreasing to 100% once you hit 50 million, this is a really big deal, because you can get cranking and get going much, much better. It's also going to make laissez-faire better as well, because your ability to use the investment pool is a critical, important thing. But the AI is going to get this too. That is interesting. Giving investment to the AI, well, they kind of always have investment pools. I don't know. We'll have to think about this one. That's a little bit interesting. Declaring bankruptcy now radicalizes a minimum of 25% of the country's population. Wah, wah, wah. With shares, buildings owned adding to that minimum. Man, we didn't even get to abuse it. Oh, I'm frustrated. We wanted to abuse this for a Japan run. We were keeping this one in our back pocket. For months, I was under the impression that bankruptcy was probably, intentionally bankrupting was probably a meta in some scenarios. I'm still not even sure if it's like universally meta. We released a video on it where you intentionally go bankrupt we intentionally went bankrupt as the EIC, and now they're making it radicalize a minimum of 25% of the country's population. With shares, buildings owned adding to that minimum. Oh, God. Man. We were gonna make a cool video where we intentionally went bankrupt over and over and over, and now they're just nerfing it. Bankruptcy now no longer increases the loyalists and radicals gained on SOL changes. Yeah, so the idea was you would intentionally kneecap, and we showed this in the video, you intentionally decrease your SOL right before you bankrupt by a lot, and then you slowly, and you have taxes at like max, and you slowly decrease taxes so that you don't have to actually gain a lot of radicalism because your SOL is always increasing. Bankruptcy now reduces leverage gain, migration attraction, and MAPI, the latter representing the general nature shock to the national economy, causing business to become more localized. We didn't even get to really abuse it. We made one video, man. Bankruptcy now drastically increases the amount of time it takes to change institution levels. All institution levels are still reset to 1 when declaring bankruptcy. Ownership buildings that own subsistence buildings are now contribute less money to the investment pool relative to how large a part of their portfolio is subsistence. What? Does this mean the contribution rate is going to be different for landowners depending on the proportion? Like, will they only have... right now they have 20% contribution. Will they have, like, 5% on specifically subsistence farms? I don't know exactly what this means. Increased base wage and dividends weight for shopkeepers. That's interesting. That will make getting publicly traded more valuable. It's also going to empower the petite bourgeoisie more. This is Doodle's work. We see Doodles' hands all over this. Doodles is the dev who was in charge of Victoria Tweak's mod that got recruited as a developer, and that mod, Victoria Tweaks, was did a ton of things to make the petite bourgeoisie stronger. This smells like one of those things. Shout out to Doodles. Manor houses can no longer invest in mines and power plants and are much less likely to invest in logging and rubber. Well, that's an interesting change. I suppose we're okay with that. Buildings will now lay off employees rather than lower wages if wages are already so low that employees are going to be rapidly radicalized. Interesting. Subsistence buildings no longer lower wages to increase profitability if wages are so low that their employees are going to rapidly radicalize. That seems like a good change. A little on the side of things that we don't necessarily see. Like, we feel the radicalism and we're like, wow, there are a lot of radicals. But we don't necessarily, like, track each individual pop and to be able to see this type of thing. Seems like... it seems like a few changes to subsistence. Adjusted provinces in the Carnatic so that the Pudokai can't be cut off entirely from the EIC in rare cases. I think there was like a situation where you need to conquer someone but you can't get in front or something. Secret police, political movement, activism reduced from 10% to 5%. People have been arguing that secret police is hyper meta. I didn't have a large enough sample size. I kind of think that National Guard is better, but maybe I'm just mistaken. The impact of number of claims on the fascist movement, pop attraction has been reduced by 50%. The fascist movement will now attract more middle class and upper class pops. If there are any powerful leftist movements in the countries, it will also be more proactive, poach from cultural majority and reactionary movements. This makes sense. People were complaining about the fascists not being very strong. Shout out to Hoey players. And so this combined with petite bourgeoisie, becoming stronger is probably going to make these movements pop off a lot more, which they probably should. Increase the movement pop attraction for leftists and social democrats, moderately increase further if certain conditions are met. Anarchist movements will now be slightly less upset on average. That's my secret cap. I'm always angry. Extraction economy will no longer destroy power plants when enabled. Well, that's interesting. I didn't realize it did. I knew it deleted heavy industry, but I guess I just didn't draw the connection. That makes sense. Extraction economy is one we have to take a close look at. It's interesting because it doesn't actually delete money. It just decreases investment pool contribution rate. So theoretically, it might be the case that if you're going for an absolute max GDP run, at the very last second, like in 1935, you're supposed to swap onto extraction economy somehow if you can. I don't think that there's a good way to swap, though. I'm not really sure. I think that the way that extraction economy... I mean, we haven't looked at all the ideologies, and we haven't particularly pursued extraction economy that aggressively, but I think the only ideology that supports it is the EICs. And other than that, it can only be enforced top-down by the overlord, where they ask you to pass the law. Honorable restoration now instantly fails when you declare bankruptcy. Bro, we just wanted to do Jewish Japan and go bankrupt a lot. I feel... maybe I'm reading too much into this. I feel attacked. The conscription rate added to revolutionary secessions from popular support and cloud has been reduced and capped at plus 10%. All right. Art. Added locust swarm harvest condition effect. Added optimal sunlight and harvest condition effect. Tweaked color of heat wave and disease outbreak ground effect interface. Updated how the affected movements are displayed in the tooltip when enacting laws. I think there was effectively a UI bug. Added information about the significance threshold of 25% movement activism for relevant concept tooltips. Yeah, that was not anywhere in any sort of tooltip. Kind of critical. It took a while for me to realize exactly where the threshold was when I had early access. Added a new trigger. This is modding stuff, so I think this is going to be lost on me, so we're not going to read through it. And now we have bug fixes. There aren't too many, so we'll read through the bug fixes. Fixed a bug where political movement chance wasn't applied to law. Started law being enacted until the law started being enacted. So if you had success chance, and you only had success chance from a movement, you couldn't start the law, but if you were already passing the law, it would contribute, something like this. Secessions of cultural minority movements now require their culture to make up at least 5% of the population for the homeland state to be a valid target for secession. Okay, fixed a bug with Turtle Island journal entry that left them unable to target relevant nations. I'm glad that they're not, like, fixing Turtle Island and just, like, removing it from the game. I imagine you could still start as France and do the Turtle Island thing, because, like, if you want to turtle, you can turtle. Fixed an impassable terrain colonization bug where a country could proceed colonizing impassable terrain it had no land access to. Interesting. Civil wars have no valid uprising states, are no longer able to start. Extraction economy now correctly applies multiplicative investment modifiers instead of additive ones. Oh! So this is a change. If it's multiplicative, then it's just deleting money. I thought it was additive modifiers. Fair enough. Fixed a bug where building at low profit levels could yo-yo between hiring employees one week and firing them the next week. This was like a big problem early on with Victoria 3. They kind of solved it. I guess they're changing a bug that kind of broke it again. Cultural majority movements now properly select states weighted by how much population belonging to the primary culture in those states. Fixed a bug where some buildings could have an owner in the null object state after annexation. The Declaration of Independence achievement is no longer be triggered by switching controlled country to an independent one. Okay, fair enough. Fixed a bug where Texas became the wrong kind of subject in the Texan War of Independence content. Texas being the wrong kind of subject? What are you trying to say? The journal entry, a new national identity, now allows for assimilation of fully accepted pops into the country's new South American culture. Resolved an issue that prevented rulers from abdicating when they should be able to. Fixed a bug where capitulating in wars more than 2 participants could cause war goals to stick around. Fixed a bug where we didn't spawn civil war events. Fixed an issue where Italian radicals would not get removed, and when annexed as part of the Risorgimento, pan-nationalism, potentially resulting in the annexing country being annexed due to, in turn, to inheriting all these radicals. That's kind of a funny one. Fixed a bug where colonization would get stuck. Fixed a bug where... I actually don't like the change where you now require a port to continue the colonization. It makes it so you have to, like, it makes sense, but what I really want is them to just automatically include or add a port to the queue. Because anytime you, like, start colonizing an area, you obviously want to colonize there from a player perspective. And yes, it doesn't make sense that you could colonize without a port, but from, like, this is one of those, like, simulation versus playability things where I think, like, it detracts from playability because you'll click the colonization button and now you have to click on the individual state and then click on a port, and so you're tripling the amount of clicks you have to do to start colonization, and I think that that's just like a bad change, even if it's more realistic. Fixed a bug where players could see the subsidize button on canals and government buildings. Yeah, we know that one. Fixed a issue that prevented consolidated colonial rule from detecting British subject states. Fixed earning recognition not advancing when country had high SOL. Fixed crash related to trade routes and shipping lanes. Alaskan industrialists no longer lack IG traits. Pressing promote European migration button and populate the Americas JE now correctly spawns migration target. I think that this interaction is kind of just weak relative to just encouraging migration anyway, though. So, fixed a tooltip for the imperialism of promised journal entries fail conditions. Cancellation of colonization of incorporated states is now prevented when that will annex the colonizer. Okay. The pro-slavery movement will no longer be extremely upset about the lack of barracks and naval bases in slave states if slavery is completely abolished. Okay. Fixed a map mode interaction tooltip for establishing colonization where multiple error messages were written. Fixed the occasionally assigned exile characters ideologies which made no sense. Is this exiling a moderate thing? Okay. And then we have how to roll back your game. If you're on an older save, you may want to continue the save. You can roll back to previous version of the game, e.g. 1.7.7, following the steps below. You right-click the game on Steam, you go to Properties, you go to Betas, and then you find the version you want to play, allow the game to update, make sure you, before you load the save, that the right version of the game is the one you want. If previous step fails, etc., mostly etc., but this is going to be good. Note, you can freely swap between the latest version and previous version this way. By selecting None, opt out of all beta programs, you go to the latest released version. Okay, but that is a rundown of both the, kind of patch as well as the dev diary. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. We'll make our head big again. Do the YouTube algorithm thing. And other than that, have a happy Thursday.